And good morning on this snowy, cold February morning. Do you guys look outside yet?
Yes.
Yeah, we got a few inches over here, and we still park the vehicles outside, and that means I got to go. I got to go wipe the car off. It's not like it used to be. It takes more energy now.
You leave your wiper blades up in the air like all these other guys do?
No, it's a good idea though.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, let's get started, fellas, and it's good to be together. Good conversation already this morning. So we're launching off, and we're just beginning chapter 12 in John. We'll look at the first couple verses. And so, as you recall, I won't, well, why now is we're moving into the Passion Week, which is really occupies almost half of John. I think it's 40% of the gospel is about the Passion Week, and we're just moving into that. Last time we discussed two human tendencies in regard to scapegoat thinking. Now, if someone were here just joining this, they go, "Gee, what the heck are you talking about?" The reason we're talking about this idea of scapegoating is because from my study and understanding, Caiaphas brings it up, and it's really, from my perspective, what John is pointing his first century audiences to, because scapegoating, this whole idea of the scapegoating, mimetic theory, and so forth that we've already looked at, is so much a part. It's a descriptor of our human condition, and that's what John is attempting to direct his audience towards. This idea that we, as humans, have a propensity to scapegoat. And anyway, that's why we're talking about it. So last time we looked at two tendencies in regard to this idea of what I'm calling scapegoat thinking. First of all, is if we are forcing others, if we are looking for a scapegoat, I call it the initiator. If you and I, or human beings, are taking the role of initiator in this kind of way we treat each other, generally speaking, as human beings, we tend to force others into what I'm calling a less than dwelling place. Less than. We're forcing others, either directly or indirectly, into some kind of living that is less than I would tolerate myself. Thus, I think the background for the golden rule: doing unto others as you wish them to do to you. So if we're initiating a scapegoat process, which to some degree may be conscious, to a high degree is not, we use means such as what I'm calling suppressive withdrawal. That means I'm engaged in actively pulling myself away from a relationship in order to inflict some level of low level or high level pain. This is what humans do to each other. It's you've done this to me, I'm going to do this to you. And it's a withdrawal. There's passive withholding of support. That's where I have the means by which to help another individual, and I withhold that for whatever reason that I come up with. There's also a high need within us to self-justify through, we use what I call source interpretation. That in our world, that would be the Bible. We have an authoritative source, and using that for personal means by which to suppress other people. It's been going on since the beginning of time. Or on the flip side, as initiator, we use a direct force in order to aggressive abuse would be the other side. Now, on the other hand, if for the side of the victim, the one being scapegoated, the victim, I think there's a high degree of us humans that we tend to assume, or we take on that persona of being victimized. And I don't think everybody, but I think it's a common human reaction to take on this role of being a victim. And so we dwell within this state, in this forced, it's a binding state, and my inner being is smoldering with frustration. Remember Jesus's words in a general sense. He says, if the Son sets you free, you shall be free indeed. I think the way generally we humans treat each other is by imparting binding elements in that relationship. Jesus is, on the contrary, here to set us free. We dwell within that in a frustrated state, and then using whatever devices we have, we adopt what I call a doormat existence. I'm being trampled upon. I am a less than individual, and I learn how to adopt within that. That's a victimized place to be. But in behind the whole scenario here is this idea of revenge. Revenge seems to be the only way out. Thus, the seedbed for acts of violence. A case in point would be a modern dilemma that we're dealing with within the last 10 or 15 years. Of the shooter tends to be a younger white male who was bullied in school and wants to go out with one last hurrah and decides to kill everybody, pointing his vengeance towards the place of his pain, and then he turns the gun on himself. It is absolutely horrible what occurs. So Jesus is returning to Bethany in 12:1 and 2, and here's the text. It says, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, here we're going into that Passion Week, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus raised from the dead. John describes that. So they made a dinner there, and Martha, one of the sisters, was serving, and Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table. So there we get the setting in Bethany. And just one more review, just to put it on the map. Here is the map. Jerusalem, of course, is right here, and Bethany is here, about 1.5 miles out. And they were, let's see, I've got to hit it again. They were out in Ephraim, out in here. The reason it's like a little cloud and a question mark, nobody really knows where Ephraim was, the little village, but it's somewhere out east of Bethany. And that's where Jesus and the disciples have been dwelling at the end of chapter 11. And so there's a morning they pack up and head towards Jerusalem. And they go here to Bethany. And this is just all review. He was in Bethany where he raised Lazarus, and now they return to Bethany. So why now? Why at this time? That's really the crux of this study. Well, let's build a case here. We know from the text that the annual Passover event is about to occur. It's 6 days out. And that annual event is absolutely critical in the life of the Jewish people. And it's a remembrance of God's deliverance from the Egyptian dominance, in the Old Testament under Moses. And one apparent parallel between this annual festival and our immediate story is that God is the initiator who acts in order to deliver. But that is a really critical piece. Who's responsible for deliverance? Well, or who is the initiator would be a better way to say that. And from my perspective, God's very nature is one of deliverance, and God is the one who acts in order to deliver. Thus, the parallel between the Passover event and Jesus coming to Jerusalem for the last time. We also know that at this time in Jerusalem, it'll be brimming with people and activity. It's a huge event. And it reminds us of the scale of human witness in relation to the cross event. Jerusalem was full. There was a lot going on, and Jesus is walking right into that. And the crucifixion will take place during that time with maximum amount of people witnessing this event. However, those are two things, but here's the big one from my perspective of the why. The answer to the why now question can be most understood in relation to Jesus's relationship with the Father, and it's over and over in the biblical text. We can safely assume that it is at this time that the Father initiated this move. Reason I say that is Jesus made a move, and he has stated elsewhere in more than one way that he only does what he sees the Father doing. The Father is the initiator. Jesus is the responder. So the very fact that he acted now in moving from Ephraim via Bethany to Jerusalem is initiated by the Father. And here, because Jesus only does what the Father initiates, it's now time to act. So there was a morning that Jesus awakened. Now, I just want you to think about this. He's in Ephraim, and he's going to stop off at Bethany. But there was a morning that Jesus awakened, and he said, it's now time. 14 times in the Gospel of John, he talks about the hour. And I think the bulk of those references, I think of one that may not be a direct reference to the cross. Everything Jesus is doing in John's Gospel account is moving towards this time. I think it's in John 12 or 14. I don't know. It could be 14. My hour has come, he says. That's where it's coming. But he's now packing his bags, and he's knowing that this is going to be the last trip. While making their way, they have a layover at Bethany. And it's here that his Bethany friends want to celebrate his presence, because this is where he raised Lazarus, and they prepare a dinner in his honor. We also know that Lazarus is alive and will be attending as a guest along with Jesus. That's what the text says. So let's think about this. We have to assume at minimum that Jesus wasn't very excited about what was going to occur in Jerusalem. He's got a cross, the crucifixion of himself is what he's going to face. And I got to believe that he wasn't excited about that. We can see that by his prayer in the garden. Father, take this, please, can this cup pass from me? And this kind of thing. Now, this is where, let's make the correlation to you and I. in a similar way, and it's my guess, if you guys are like me, which I think we all are, that all of us have awakened some morning to a dreaded circumstance, whatever it is. Bad news, a relational bad news, a job, someone loses their job, a health issue, a financial issue, a loved one in a real trouble or a loss. But as long as we have been alive, I think everyone here has experienced this dreaded awakening to today's the day. Today is the day. I'm sure we all have stories. From my experience, when I awaken to such a dark circumstance, and I'll tell you one story here in just a little bit. The gloom of those circumstances really dominates my thoughts. It's really hard for me. I can't relax. It's just overtaking my thinking. I really have no desire to be with others. I'd rather just go for a walk or be by myself. I like to go to myself. I find solace in being alone. And let alone, I don't want to go to a dinner party like Jesus in Bethany. I don't want to do that. I just want to get through it, get over it. And I venture to say that probably everyone here probably feels much the same. In contrast, we do know from elsewhere in the text in Hebrews that Jesus is looking at this occasion and he's deriving joy for what is before him. Hebrews 12:2 says that the joy that was set before him, he was able to endure the cross, despising the shame. So there is, within this Passion Week, there is a joy that is experienced by Jesus. That is mind-boggling. I want to believe that this is true, that what's true of Jesus, as in Hebrews 12:2, can be true of me and you as well. I want to believe that. But I simply have not yet experienced this level of dooming event. I can't imagine walking to Jerusalem knowing it's the last. I believe Jesus knew that the cross was coming. That's my stance. And it's just really hard for me to believe that he could have any level of conversation or interaction, let alone a dinner party, and get through it knowing what's going to happen in a week. That is mind-boggling. Now, this is where we're going to go with this. I do know this on a way, I should have put way less severe scale. Not my own crucifixion, but a cross-like experience. I do know this is true, that when I have experienced such a difficulty, a dooming situation, and I have been able to lean towards that difficult occasion, this idea of leaning towards, and I'd like to grapple with that with you, that idea of leaning towards. I have actually received comfort, encouragement, and hopefulness in relation to that occasion. Let me explain. As I was preparing this, I've had more than one. You probably have as well. But the one that came to mind is it was Christmas Eve. Let's see. It was the day before Christmas. No, it was Christmas Eve. It was Christmas Eve, and I don't know the year. It was over 20 years ago. But I was, I had the Collins Control and Electric, and I was leading it. And And we had a very poor financial year. We lost a good chunk of money, and the bank got really nervous because I owed them, I had a big note. I owed them a lot of money. And the banker, whose last name, get this is so ironic, his last name was Claus. This is Christmas Eve. So Claus shuts down our loan. I mean, my line of credit, all of our assets were frozen. I didn't have a checking account. And they called me in on Christmas morning or Christmas Eve morning and said, we're shutting you down. And you've got 30 days. We're not going to administrate the loan, what they call it, calling the loan. We give you 30 days to pay us back. An insurmountable thing. So it was extremely discouraging on Christmas Eve getting shut down. And no checking account. We had money in the bank, ready for payroll the next week. We actually had nothing. And what they do, none of you have ever had a loan call, but what they do is they remove clause from the formula and they bring in what they call a workout person. And a workout person's objective is to maximize the bank's benefit and minimize, get as much as they can out of this bad deal. And I can remember the following week sitting with the workout person in a staff meeting, and they say, she said to me, Mr. Hadorf, have you got your life insurance paid up? And I said, yeah, I do. She said, good. And she said, oftentimes when people are under stress like this, it's an important thing to talk about. It's ruthless. It's terrible. I went into a deep depression. It was really tough. However, during that next day on Christmas, I was able to enter in and engage in the festivities with Sandra's family, and my family was there. And I remember aspects about that day. I knew that I had to go out on the 26th, and I had to go out and find a bank that would loan us money. I don't know how it all happened. I don't know how we got through that, but I had to engage. I had to engage on the 26th, but yet for some reason, and I believe it was the grace of God comforting me, that I was able to enter in and laugh and enjoy the festivities, knowing that the 26th, I was able to lay it aside. And then through an incremental process over the course of about, I think the note was 7 years, they didn't pull a loan, and we ended up paying the whole thing back. So I paid back a lot of money. So this idea of leaning towards, the grace event in my life was I felt like I could move forward. I just didn't lay down and die. And I remember making a vow during this time. I said, I'm going to come out here to work. I'm going to get my boots on every morning, come out here to work. And as long as there's not a padlock on the door, I'm going to open up shop. And that's what we did. And not to my any praise or anything. It was the grace of God. I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I wouldn't trade it. So there's this idea of leaning into difficulty, not laying down, not running away, but facing the pain is what Jesus is going to show us. And what I'm trying to get across is that through that experience, I received really good things. Now, the word comfort comes to mind. That it was dire. We literally didn't have a dollar to our name, and we had guys showing up for work on Monday or on whatever the 26th was. And I did have a little bit of latitude in there because a lot of the guys were off during that time. But the 26th, I was in the bank trying to convince people to, and being turned down. That whole thing of rejection. Oh my goodness, it was a horrible time. But through that time, I received comfort. Keep going. For some reason, I was encouraged. And I don't know why. I don't know why I was encouraged to keep going. I simply don't know. And through this combination here, I had hope. I just had hope for one more day, maybe the next hour, maybe the half a day, but just keep showing up is what we did. So that was my story. So the idea of this line is to show that these things below there gave me something, and I call it capacity. And I'm expressing this from my own experience, and I want us to talk about this because I think some of you, if not all of you, have experienced this. I describe what I experienced in dire circumstances financially. I had stage 4 financial cancer, and but yet within that realm, within that reality, I felt like I had capacity to keep going and to just in compliance. We didn't buck the system. We didn't send hate mail to our banker Claus. I've seen him several times later, and we haven't laughed about it, but we've been. I have no ill will. No. I needed to go through this, fellas. I was arrogant and there's a whole story what builds up here of why it was my poor, maybe not poor choice. Yeah, it was a poor choice, but lack of choosing. I was bored. I was sick of this. I wanted out. And I made some, I did enough to get by, but I put us in this situation, not by overspending or some sort of drug habit or anything like this, but I'm the one responsible and paid a dear price. Wouldn't want to go through it again, but I'll never look at a struggling business person the same again. This is what happens. This is what can happen. So, but through that time, I learned a great deal of the grace of God about capacity to move forward. So I know that you guys have experienced dire, just the fact of your age, we've all had pending doom in our experiences. So as we think about the emotion, this setting, we now go back to Jesus, and Jesus is attending a dinner party, which represents the everydayness of our lives, the normality of life and the festiveness, the good aspects of life. So as we attend a dinner party while on the way to one's own crucifixion, this is the irony in this whole thing. It should stop us in our tracks. This is where people live. And so there you've got it in a little graphic, the reality of the cross event on one hand, and the joy that was set before him on the other hand. And we're grappling with these two ideas, the reality of a cross event, but yet from the testimony of Scripture, what was going on in the person of Jesus, there was a joy that was present. And I'd like to know from you guys, what can you tell us in regard to this experience, this kind of experience? What did you feel? What how did you how did you do, what did you learn about how to navigate? This is something common to life, but it's very, very strenuous and very difficult. So let's enter into this idea. Maybe we can use that graphic, but I'd really love to hear your thoughts from your own experience on this kind of thing.
Well, the one that comes to my mind, and I don't know where to put myself in this, was my divorce. And I'm not sure if that was sometimes you move forward in a direction which may not be a positive direction, but you see there's the only way out. I mean, in your case, you could have declared bankruptcy,
Yeah.
Again, stressful, but it's not a positive outcome of the situation. But I remember going back to see with my wife's family for a while, thinking this is the last time I'm going to see them. And so I made the best of it. But I kept thinking the joy set before him. I mean, I didn't see Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane having a lot of joy.
No.
And so that joy must be way down the road there or something.
That's the dilemma. That's the mystery. I don't see Jesus expressing joy in the garden, but yet I want to believe, I do believe that there was a joy, and it's based primarily in a minutia way from my own experience. I think it's real.
I mean, I came out in a place of happiness from that, but I'm not sure if that was at the expense of someone else or not. It was interesting. It's complex.
Do you guys know who Calvin Butts is? Reverend. He was the pastor of Abyssinian Church in New York, in Harlem, New York.
No.
He spoke. He just passed away about 2-3 months ago, but he spoke at the memorial right after 9/11. They had this big memorial service. It might have been at, I don't know where it was.
At Ground Zero?
I don't think it was there. It might have been like at Shea Stadium or something, but whatever. It was a big deal. They had a lot of people coming, and they had representatives of all the major traditions there to speak, rabbis and priests and such. But Calvin Butts was he represented his church, Abyssinian Church, and he's just a very forceful. He's a Martin Luther King kind of a guy. I mean, he really, when he speaks, it changes the world. But what he spoke was, we will get through it. That was his Tony Campola thing, of Sunday's coming. Yeah. We're going to get through this. This will happen. And he kept repeating it over and over again. And the crowd erupted into joy and cheers.
Yeah.
But the people that were cheering many times were the widows of firefighters who had just died, yesterday. The tower collapsed on them, and the police officers that died, and all of the first responders that died were in the crowd trying to get some sort of comfort out of this and hope. And he gave it to them. And I thought, there's something inside humanity, I think, and I'm presuming Jesus included, that there's a spark of hope that a little bit of fanning the flame is enough to get you through it. I know that I'm going to be nailed to a tree. I know this is not pleasant. I live in the town where they do this. I've seen these guys on the side of the road
Yeah.
weeping and praying to die, so to speak. And that's going to be me tomorrow.
Yeah. That's
But
just,
the joy that was set before him was enough to to get him through that. You know, I'm filling in a lot of the gaps here. I don't know what Jesus was thinking. But the people in the audience at 9/11, they were holding photographs of their loved one that they're looking for. They're looking for remains.
yeah.
But uh, they were cheering almost in victory because Calvin Butts was saying, "We're going to get through this. This we've been through a lot. This is one of the things, and we'll get through this too, because the human spirit is bigger than anything that can be done to us." And I mean, he was just—it's on YouTube. You can just look it up. It's incredible.
It must be, when I hear you talk, Vince, it's like there's something residing within us, and I believe placed there by God,
Yeah.
that is in a sense dormant, and somehow when Calvin Butts speaks, it comes alive, because they're acting way out of how they should be acting.
I don't think the people that go into, as you recounted, the people that go into high schools with a submachine gun and kill all their friends is the normal response to life. I think the normal response to life is the searching for any flicker of hope and grabbing onto it when it's there,
Yeah.
and knowing that better is in the future.
I
I don't.
agree with that. Yeah. It's woundedness that drives that action. It's severe woundedness that drives that violent action. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Mike, for in what Christ was going through, the joy set before him was not the event he was going through. And it's the same in our lives. We don't look at the junk or the difficult circumstance that we're dealing with at the time and take joy out of that. The joy comes in knowing that God is in control, and that's what Christ was. He knew he was doing the Father's will. He knew that going through this, he knew the outcome of it. He knew that people's lives would be saved and changed. Now, I don't know if there's anything in our lives that we can look to on that scale, but I know I've probably told you this story that we lost a child between my two youngest, that we found out that she was anencephalic, which means it's like spina bifida, but it happens at the top of the neural tube. So the back of the head and the brain does not develop beyond the brainstem. And the way they described it as they looked at these images was that this is a condition not compatible with life outside the womb. And that's how the doctor described it to us as we went through this.
Oh, wow.
And we did not, we knew 5 months before she was born that she would not live. So we had, that amount of time to deal with this, but we did find joy in that we knew that we would see this child at some point. Not, she wasn't a pretty child to look at when she was born because of the way this thing develops. But the joy came from knowing that in the future we would see this child in heaven. And I know that Christ did not look on the cross it meant and say, boy, this brings me joy. But he knew that going through this had a higher purpose, and that lives would be saved, lives would be changed because of what he's going through. And I don't know that I ever felt that way, but the joy came from knowing that God was in control, and God was going to allow me to see this child, or the, and I don't even know in heaven if you grow or if you mature and how old this child is in heaven, but it brings me joy to know that I will see this child. So we don't get joy out of the situation itself. We get joy knowing that God will get us through the situation and that he's still in control.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, thanks for the story too. Appreciate that.
I think Jeff tied into something real important. All of us, most of us aren't scared of death. None of us want to die. And it's sort of like Jesus knew he'd rise again. He knew there was a resurrection in front of him. I think he'd like to have gotten there a different way than the cross. That's why he had that battle in Gethsemane. And he's very human. But that was in Corinthians says, if we don't believe in the resurrection, we're fools and preaching everything in vain. It's not pie in the sky thinking to believe that all our prayers will be answered and there's a future in front of the resurrection to get us through tough times, because that's true. Especially if someone's going to kill you, you got to believe that Jesus is on the other side waiting for you to do what he's promised to do.
Right. Yeah.
So, Bill, Totsy's got his
Hey,
hand.
John, let Totsy go, and then you can. Totsy,
I was going to ask Bill a question, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about when we did our second mission trip to Vietnam, and when we went into there, our goal was to actually go to a poor, because in Hanoi, and there was these Christian villages that were really, being discriminated against in terms of everything. So anyway, we went in there with that goal, and when we got there, we found that the crate that we had delivered months and months before to arrive there was stuck in Haiphong Harbor, and all of the medical supplies for the surgeons that were bringing in from New York, and all of our eyeglasses that we were going to pass out in the village, and all of the antibiotics medicines we had were all stuck there. So there we are sitting in Hanoi, and it was so discouraging that our leaders, actually our doctor and the head of they wanted to go home. Okay.
Yeah.
And in our midst, we had there was 3 or 4 women that were prayer warriors, and you probably knew some of them. Some of you may have known them, but anyway, they prayed like crazy and whatever, and they really were calling on God to show us what we should do, and so anyway, I think the gist of it was, for me, I was in charge of the eyeglasses. So what happened to me was I got a hold of Bing, who was the one from Loveland that organizes this whole thing. She had she had a cousin that was named Uncle No Problem, because you would go to him and he would say, "No problem." I'd say, "Uncle No Problem, what should I do about glasses?" He says, "Let's go out into the market and we'll buy some readers." Okay. So we did that. We went out there, and it was a wonderful experience for us. You sat down in Vietnamese style, squatting and whatever, and he being up there, and he would get these readers. Okay. So anyway, we got these readers, and when we went and ministered, and we got them actually at a price that was really low because he had bargained them down. So we got out there and we went to the village and we gave out those things, and it was unbelievable the impact, the positive impact it had, rather than trying to fit them, custom made with glasses, which take a lot of time. The readers you can pass out and they instantly, they get instant gratification and the joy. And there was women there that were kneeling down and kissing my hands, and it was so joyous that. So anyway, we ran out of them. So then we were going down to a ministry that was in the city there where we were staying, and so we're driving around there, and he it was an experience I'll never forget. It was joyous but scary. They have these little motor scooters, okay, that they go around there. They have a 125cc restriction on there, so everybody has motor scooters. And he says, well, let's go get a motor scooter. I said, okay, let's get a couple of more. No, he says, let's get on with me. So there's 3 of us on these motor scooters driving around. He goes to the stores and they want so much money for it, and they don't even have that many. He finally goes to a vendor that he knows that has a whole bunch of them in general. And he bargains them down to where we actually paid less than what we paid in the place that we had in the tree. So I don't know. It was just kind of a fun experience for me. And then the other thing is, on the medical ministry, the surgeons that came in from New York, because they didn't have any of the tools or the surgeon stuff that are there, was they actually taught the people in the hospital that they were going to, they taught them how to do things rather than showing them that they were great surgeons, kind of a thing. And the other thing was that they had no delivery room, so they had that set up for them. And anyway, we went over there because there was a woman and there was a kid in a girl in the room that was actually set up. She had a broken arm, and they were afraid that she would survive, because there, when they administered anesthesia, they didn't have any instrumentations, so they would just see how fast her arm dropped, okay, when they administered. So she had been over anesthetized. So we went over there to pray for her or whatever. And then Marlene, they found out that we had one of these oxygen monitors, that you guys had seen, where you put them on your finger, kind of a thing. So we have one in our survival kit. So Marlene said she would get that. So we went back to our place where we were ministering, and she came back. She went back to the hospital to bring them the oxygen monitor, and then she comes back about a half hour later, and she's got bags full of antibiotics. And so, and it was actually, we had so many antibiotics on that trip that we had to bring some home. We had so many. And it was because the surgeons had put their instruments in there. They had stuffed their suitcases full of antibiotics, and they gave them to us because they were so happy that we had brought over the oxygen monitor. So, so anyway, and when we got back there, Darry's sermon was actually on, the boy that had taken his lunch, and those fishes and loaves and whatever were turned to feed 5,000. So it was actually one of those cases where we had a wonderful experience and a truly great mission trip, in spite of the catastrophe of not having all those materials delivered in that. So, and the reason why I was stuck there was actually because there was a rumor that the used clothes in there would give you AIDS. So that's why they had it stuck there. So truly ignorance on their part. So in the Vietnamese part.
So if I understand what you're saying, Totsi, I mean, there's a lot of details there I didn't quite get, but the gist of what I heard you say is that you were put in a situation out of your control, and rather than, laying down or going home, you kind of the team kind of rolled with it, and great things happened because you were there and you pushed into difficulty. And as a result, some great things happened.
Well, I believe it was because of the godly influence of the prayer, of God answering those prayers.
Yeah.
And we've all felt that,
Yeah.
because here our leaders were so discouraged that they went up. So who gave us the leadership to stay there? It was God, that did it.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you for sharing that. And John, I cut you off before, but go ahead and
No, I was just going to follow up with Bill and put Bill on the spot. That's always fun. But
the challenge is with all of us is, can we remember what we said? So we'll see. Go ahead.
Well, so the idea of joy, I think that's a sidebar, kind of like Jeff was saying. For short term, you're saying facing pending doom. And the couple verses that you picked, it says, Jesus, therefore, 6 days before Passover. So Jesus knew he had 6 days. At least I think he did, right? I think he knew this thing was coming together on Passover. He knew time was short. So if you had 6 days, and you're talking about the human side of things, a bad situation, you lean into it. And that was on the business side. But if you knew you had a limited time left and you felt good and you had your wherewithal and you had 6 days, what would you do? What would be important? So I think the thing that's important is people, relationships. But the question is, how do you go through this? And so, Bill, I was going to ask you, so your wife says one day, kind of hits you out of the blue, says, that's it, I've had enough, I want a divorce. And Vince can identify with this, right? So now I say, well, now what? So per Mike, in our conversation here, in his example, he would say, well, lean into it and it'll be all right. It'll be some capacity. So anyway, my question was, Mike's question is, so how do you feel? So how did you feel when you were in that facing pending doom? And if you don't want to answer, it's fine.
No, that's a tough question. But there's two things. I mean, obviously, divorce comes out of a very poor relationship. And there is a sense of release. That's sad but true. But yeah, okay. You usually come out of it. When you go through stuff like that, your memory, it's fuzzy. You're kind of sleepwalking through it.
Yeah.
So sleepwalking is the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
You're there, but you're not there.
So where I'm going with this, back to how Mike has set the table, so to speak, for table time, is, how do we survive in these situations? We all are going to have, face our own death one day. So that is coming. if we had a 6-day warning, what would we choose to do? But would we lean into it? Right. So that's a piece of it. The question is, would we reach out to God in a real personal way, much like David may have, right? Would there be something, and maybe not, but I guess, is this anyway? So when you experience tough times, the question is, the rubber's going to hit the road, and the reality is striking. And they say what's really important is really two things: our relationship with others, and kind of like the Pope's last words were, Jesus, I love you. Right? Is that a reality, or is that just my religion as opposed to something very personal?
Thank you, John. Dave, you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, two quick things, not related to each other, and one more related to the discussion here, and the other's what I think is a very interesting sidebar. But I think Tatsi's story in oversimplified form demonstrates the concept of dying before you die. Going to Luke 9:24, and through the result of prayer and everything else, in a situation where the leaders said, we're dead, we can't do anything, other people said, no, we're not dead yet, let's see what we can do. And so they did. So in a sense, they died before the whole thing died, so that's a real encouraging story, and a real encouraging perspective, Tatsi, on how to how to make lemonade out of lemons, I guess, is another way. The other thing that I think is interesting, and it's related more broadly on going into the rest of John and all the rest of that. Passover was the first feast that Jesus attended. If you go back to the 2nd chapter of Luke, it talks about a young man at age 12 coming to Jerusalem for his bar mitzvah on the Passover. And that was Jesus. And his last feast will be at Passover. And like I say, I think there's some really interesting parallels in that whole thing if you take into account the Jewish belief of what the bar mitzvah was. He has become a man at age 12, and what his parents are lost, they're panicked. Here's the situation that you're talking about, Mike. Gosh, what am I going to do? He's gone. Where's Jesus? He's gone. Well, they find him, in the temple teaching, Well, here he is again, back in Jerusalem, still teaching. And I just think it's a really interesting parallel that he becomes a man at age 12 at a Passover feast in Jerusalem, and he totally fulfills the manhood, the God-man. He totally fulfills that at a Passover in Jerusalem. I just think it's fascinating to have two parallels.
Yeah, that's a neat parallel. I'll be thinking on that, Dave. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a question about that, Dave, and I expect you know it. If Jesus died for our sins, why didn't this happen on Yom Kippur as opposed to Passover?
Interesting. That's interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, Day of Atonement versus God's deliverance.
Yeah.
Interesting. Never thought of that one.
Sacrifice has to be made first.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a thought. I mean,
that's an interesting.
Well, all these, we want these little answers to things like that, right, Bill? I mean, but all these things kind of
not critical for me, but they're just interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, John the Baptist says, behold the Lamb of God, right? And so this whole idea of being the lamb through Revelations, there's just different pieces to the puzzle as opposed to, having, 2 + 2 = 4, I think. So, hey, Mike, quick question. So during your business collapse, which must have been horrific,
Yeah, it was.
so did you pray? Where was God in that? Or was God not in that at all? Was it purely, I mean, you say by the grace of God, but when you were going through it, was there a spiritual piece to that, or no? Was it more just?
I look at it. I was so devastated about the occasion. I had no wherewithal within. I know that one night when I was going through it, my oldest son, Joel, came up to me and said, "Dad, you really look depressed. Can I pray for you?" I didn't pray. I mean, I probably did. I don't remember it, but it wasn't like a magic thing you do. I didn't kick into a bunch of activities that would promote the activity of God. I honestly believe God came to me in my time of need, a helpless time of need. By the grace of God, the pity of God came to me for help. That's how I view it. No activity on my part that deserved any activity on the heart of God.
So
Nothing.
you didn't cry out to God and say, help?
I probably did, but I don't remember it.
Yeah, it's okay.
But
Sometimes all you need is the strength to get your foot on the floor.
yeah, great
Well-
question though. I think it's God who acted to save me.
But yeah, a lot of our life journey is God helping us in spite of ourselves, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's true of me. Well, we want to go, guys. Thank you, John. And I've got a question, a technical question before we wrap up. I've got on my screen, I don't know if you guys got it, down on that last that last sentence, there's a little blue thing, and it said at one time Bill Schweitzer. Did you mark on the screen, Bill?
I saw a little pencil over there, and I go, "What's this?" And so I clicked on it, and I drew that, and I said, "Oh, I don't want that." And I'm trying to erase it and stuff, and I didn't realize it would affect you. So
Now it's
that's
on
my
the.
fault.
So
That's
are
me.
you? So who is that?
That was me trying to do what Bill just say he's doing.
It's kind of cool, but
I don't want that much power.
No, me either. I wanted to get rid of it because
I didn't know he could. Is that under the annotate?
On the far left corner, there's a green pencil that pops up if you click over there. And if you click on it, you can draw stuff, but I did. But now I went to eraser,
Oh,
and
Yeah, it's like
I erased
Excel.
yeah.
okay, I
highlight.
erased it.
Oh,
Good.
okay. Oh, good. Yeah, thank you.
So, well, yeah, I didn't know how that worked.
I stumbled over it just because I was goofing around while we were talking,
Hi.
Good thing it wasn't a trap door or something. That would have
Yeah,
I gotta get rid of that. All right, guys. So I'm gonna let you go, and we'll meet next week. Today is the 15th. We'll meet on the 22nd.
Awesome.
We'll meet next week. So have a good week, everybody, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Bye for now.
Bye.
All right.